Dear friends, I welcome you all. This is our time, and here are the main events in Ukraine and the world at this hour. Layla Mammadova is here in the studio for you. Hello. Ukraine did not want war. It offered peace and agreed to a ceasefire, but Russia continues its terror. This was stated by the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. According to him, the Russian Federation is disrupting negotiations and intensifying attacks. Almost every day there are new strikes on cities and villages. Just this week, the enemy has used more than 3,000 attack drones, over 1,000 guided aerial bombs, and nearly 50 missiles. Russia is deliberately targeting civilian critical infrastructure. Zelenskyy is convinced. The war continues because Moscow does not want to end it, the president stated.
We are constantly strengthening our defenses, working with our partners to reinforce our air defense. The PRO program, investments in Ukrainian defense, bilateral and multilateral formats. You can't stop Putin with just talk. Pressure is needed. The world sees that Russia responds to strength. Therefore, the world can succeed through strength. Ukraine will not give terrorists any reward for their crimes. And we count on our partners to support this very position. Decisive action is needed from the US, Europe, G20 countries, and the G7. We need to protect life. Thank you to everyone who helps with this. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
11 people were injured as a result of the Russian Federation's attack on the Dnipropetrovsk region. The Russians struck with a drone. This was reported by the regional prosecutor's office. As a result of the shelling, fires broke out in 3 apartment buildings. A private house caught fire, and infrastructure was damaged. Nikopol was also under attack. The enemy used artillery and deployed drones. Air defense forces shot down 4 Russian drones in the region. 4 people were injured as a result of the Russian Federation's strike on the Sumy region. This was reported by the national police. In Sumy, a woman and a man were wounded. A shell hit the railway station building. 2 more women were injured at a gas station. A Russian FPV drone flew into the premises. In total, 58 shellings were recorded in the region over the past day. 48 settlements came under fire. Investigators, bomb disposal experts, and rescuers are working at the scene. The police have opened criminal proceedings under the article on war crimes. The Atesh partisans disabled a radio tower in the Bryansk region, paralyzing the command system of the Russian occupiers. This was reported by the movement. The sabotage disrupted communications and coordination among the border service units, the engineering battalion, and the Russian National Guard, causing chaos in command and a temporary loss of control over part of the border. The enemy faced serious problems in responding to threats. ATAC emphasizes, the attack demonstrated the vulnerability of Russian troops, even deep in the rear. The partisans continue to carry out targeted strikes on the military infrastructure of the Russian Federation. The resumption of military conscription in Germany could serve as a deterrent signal to Russia. This was stated by the country's defense minister Boris Pistorius, according to Spiegel. The coalition in Germany continues to discuss reforming compulsory military service. According to the minister, the draft, which was suspended in 2011, could be reinstated immediately. Pistorius also admitted that abolishing local military commissariats after the suspension of the draft was a serious mistake.
If we reinstate the military draft for all men of a certain age and collect data on everyone who is fit for military service, this will also be noticed in Russia. In other words, this is also a deterrent factor. Boris Pistorius, Germany's defense minister.
In Poland, there is growing interest in survival and military training courses amid the threat of war with Russia. Citizens are attending shooting ranges and tactical training sessions. The government plans to increase defense spending to 4.5% of GDP and expand basic military training for adults. Authorities are also conducting first aid courses for young people. According to The Telegraph, more and more Poles are joining organizations where they are taught guerrilla skills and self-defense. Instructors have noted an increase in demand since the start of the Russian Federation's war against Ukraine and incidents involving drones on Polish territory. The war in Gaza will only end after all the terms of the agreement are fulfilled. This was stated by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. According to him, the main priority is the return of the Israeli hostages. Active work is currently underway on this, the prime minister emphasized, and noted that Israel demands full implementation of the agreements. Hamas must be disarmed. Otherwise, Israel will do it by force. Netanyahu stressed that only after the demilitarization of Gaza will the hostilities be completely over. Let me remind you, according to the first stage of the agreement, Israel was supposed to open the Rafah crossing on Wednesday, but did not do so. And the day before, the IDF reported that it had recovered the bodies of 3 more deceased hostages who had been held by Hamas. Pakistan and Afghanistan have agreed to an immediate ceasefire. This was reported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Qatar. After negotiations in Doha, both sides agreed to establish mechanisms to ensure lasting peace and stability. In addition, according to Qatar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Kabul and Islamabad plan to hold another meeting in the coming days. Let me remind you, on October 15th, Pakistan and Afghanistan agreed to a 48-hour truce amid recent fighting on the border. Earlier, there were reports of fighting on the border and the deaths of more than a dozen civilians and military personnel. Pakistani authorities blamed the Taliban movement for the incident. According to Reuters, the conflict escalated after Islamabad demanded that the Taliban deal with militants who carry out attacks in Pakistan and are allegedly operating from safe havens in Afghanistan. No to kings. Mass protests against President Donald Trump took place in the United States. Thousands of people took to the streets in all 50 states, Reuters reports. The protesters are speaking out against Trump's policies. Activists are particularly dissatisfied with Trump's decision to deploy National Guard troops to American cities. There is also criticism of immigration raids and cuts to aid. Organizers emphasize that the protests are peaceful and their goal is to protect democracy and civil rights. The demonstrations are a continuation of the June protest held on Trump's birthday. In Omsk, on October 11th, local authorities announced that all apartments were fully connected to the heating system, but people are still freezing. In Barabitsan, officials blamed the residents themselves for the lack of heat. They supposedly didn't bleed the air out of the radiators. And in one of the settlements in Khabarovsk Krai, the heating season hasn't started because the boiler house burned down earlier this year. Russia could face a repeat of the utilities collapse from the winter of 2024. My colleague Victoria Chistiakina will tell you more about this in a moment.
In Russia, residents of dozens of regions may be left without heating. Despite official reports claiming a supposedly stable start to the heating season, Russians are heading into winter with cold radiators. In many regions, the heating system is working intermittently or hasn't been started at all. The wear and tear on Russian heating networks has reached an average of 40%, and in some regions, it's over 80%. There is no investment in utility infrastructure, and rising rates are not accompanied by any improvements. In the summer, entire cities were left without water, and in the winter, dozens of regions risk being left without heat. From a statement on the website of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. According to data from the Russian Ministry of Finance at the end of August, the Kremlin's budget had a deficit of almost 2% of GDP, which is more than 4 trillion rubles. That's 150 times more than a year ago. 4 trillion makes up about a third of the Kremlin's military budget for 2025. With that money, based on average prices in Russian regions, you could buy 840,000 apartments or repair thousands of kilometers of heating networks. But the Kremlin has no intention of stopping the war against Ukraine or cutting its spending on it. That's why, instead of public utilities and other social benefits, Russians are being offered tax hikes.
The situation is so bad, revenues from exports are dropping so sharply. Exports of oil, gas, coal, metallurgical products, agricultural products, petroleum products, the timber industry, and everything else, that just the infamous oil and gas revenues alone have already plummeted by more than 22% since the beginning of the year. By July-August, the decline had accelerated to 35 to 37%. And, well, the domestic economy is also shrinking, slipping into recession, into crisis.
And there's no one to repair public utilities either. Russia is facing an acute labor shortage. On the one hand, the number of unemployed people in the regions is growing, but on the other hand, companies can't find qualified specialists. The Russian monopoly company RZD is shutting down projects and cutting staff. The reason is a sharp drop in transportation volumes, rising loan costs, and a general worsening of the economic situation. The head of Russian Railways, Belozerov, has ordered a report by November 1st on how many company employees will be laid off. In August, Russian Railways sent employees from the central office and railway administrations on a mandatory unpaid leave, 2 days each month at their own expense. Now, a full-scale staff reduction is starting, which will affect management personnel. To make ends meet, Russian Railways has slashed its investment program by almost 40%, putting the largest railway construction projects on hold, including the expansion of the BM and Trans-Siberian Railway for transporting raw materials to China. From a publication by the Moscow Times, only an economic collapse could force Putin to come to the negotiating table, the president of Finland is convinced. New restrictions against the aggressor country and providing Ukraine with a reparations loan using frozen Russian assets. These are the pressure factors that can really work, according to Alexander Stubb.
We don't need so much the power of the carrot to persuade Russia to come to the negotiating table as the power of the stick to force them to do it. That's why we need to force Russia to sit down at the table to negotiate peace. And that's exactly what President Trump is trying to do.
Meanwhile, Russian citizens are getting ready to relive last winter's experience. The communal collapse of 2024 was remembered for the flood of their video appeals to Putin, pleading for help. Residents of the Moscow suburbs were making bonfires in their courtyards just to keep warm. In the entryways, not only the windows, but even the walls were covered in frost. Chunks of ice lay on the floor, and radiators were bursting in apartments. At the same time, Putin's press secretary, Peskov, was assuring the entire country on every TV screen that all the breakdowns had long been fixed and the problems resolved. Victoria Chistyakina, For Freedom TV channel.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.